Hi, everyone. I'm really excited for this week's guest in studio. We have a formidable industry leader, someone that I have great respect for, that I've had the opportunity to speak with and share the stage at conferences in the past. But I want to welcome Vandna Bhrany. Vandna, so glad that you're with us and that you're able to join us today. So thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely.
I'm always good to have a chat with you. And every single time I'm either on the stage or on the phone with you, I think I learn at least one new thing. So it's my pleasure.
I would say likewise. I always enjoy when we get to do, especially the conference wrap ups. Those are always the best because we get to reflect on all the learnings that have gone on and I think really digest the information that's come out of the conference. And there's definitely been a lot of developments of late in our industry.
There has been, and that's a fun spot. I know most people don't want to pay for it, but it actually is a really fun spot to be on the stage.
Absolutely. 100%. All right. We were talking about, we've had the opportunity to serve together at various conferences and want to introduce to folks that you're a fellow for RISE. And I know that we've spoken together many times, either at National, RISE West. We recently did the Bedrock series. Um, I know we've spoken together at the Women's Conference.
Mhm.
And I was hoping that we could talk a little bit more about because one of the things that comes up a lot in these podcasts that I do is around leadership, making that movement into the space. I think getting comfortable in the space, and I think that can be more challenging sometimes when you add the complexities of being female, being multi-generational, and then also too a woman of color. And so would love to get your thoughts, any advice you might have, any stories that you might share around your leadership journey within this healthcare space.
I appreciate that. We have had some really great conversations in those sessions, I would say, Shannon. One of the things that I enjoy the most about this space, and I actually find it quite humbling, is the wealth of information that the women that I've met and the men that I've met have been open to sharing and supporting. I think for me, leadership is about just that, is finding the way to truly support others. I think it's a bit of a cliche to lift each other up, but there's absolutely nothing wrong at any level in an organization and any level in your life to support someone else and to do that with humility and sincerity. And I've really found that I found that space in the RISE community to be incredibly humbling when we think about the many people that we see when you befriend over a session or two, and many of the women that are entering the space. I've had some really great experiences where, you know, as a as I guess a speaker, as a payer, there's definitely a lot of folks that want to knock on your door. And I love some of the women and their insightfulness and just their simplicity and how they want to engage and how they want to learn and be a part of the community.
Are there recommendations that you would have? And would love even to, if you think that it's necessary, and maybe you don't, to break it up for maybe someone that's starting in the industry versus someone that has been a part of the industry for a while. Should we attend to those different groups? And then what should their attention be? Should it be different? Can it be the same?
I think that's a really interesting question. I would say that early on in your career, it's the time to soak it up, talk to everyone, ask questions. It's a very daunting space in some respects. And one of the things that I see women struggle with, especially where we are now, is being being uber focused on the title and not on the learning. There's nothing wrong with taking a lateral move. Nothing wrong with moving from company to learn. I would say that was one of the things in my journey that has made just incredible, has just been made it an incredible journey is because I have been able to move and learn something new almost at every job that I've taken. So you start off with one job, which is not unusual these days in lean environments, is you start off with one job and when you eventually leave, you've got at least three that you could outline. And so it's early on, I would say take the opportunity to learn as much as you can. I think one of the regrets that I would probably say I had from an early on perspective is I became too niche. I would reflect back on my career and maybe have taken more opportunities to try different things, maybe actually take roles that were different than just ones that were focused on HEDIS and quality. And I would say as you get further along in your career, this is something that I think you and I have talked about, is one of the things that I find to be the most opportune, we have the most opportunity and we also have the hardest time doing it, is really being a woman in our space, like a truly woman. We have emotion, we have humility, we have sincerity, we have the ability to listen, and we have the ability to bring patience to the table. And what frustrates me the most as a woman today in organizations that I work in or have worked at is the fact that there are other women leaders that are more than willing to beat you down instead of help you up. We can all be successful. There's a lot of work to be done in our industry. There's a lot of work to be done to support people that we serve. And I think as leaders, sometimes we forget that.
I think you make a very interesting observation, and I'd be curious to just hear your thoughts on why you think that that occurs, and whether it be male or female, but just the fact of where some find it difficult, right, to support one another, and where maybe that thinking comes from, and how one might either be able to identify it, maybe not avoid it, but either disassociate or disengage or dismantle the power of the air, so you can continue on your leadership journey. Any recommendations or any thoughts there?
I think one thing is to not personalize it, especially when you feel like that's happening to you. That's a really hard thing to do because in many times it is personal. Even though, as one might say, you're trying to do your job, but when what you're trying to do involves not just doing your job, but also creating a place of power, it is a personal thing because you're creating a space of power for yourself, and that takes away some of that space for someone else, for the other person. I think that's really important, though, is find a way to not personalize it for yourself, because that's not a great space to be in. And really, what I think is the most important thing is to focus on doing your job, right? Is do your job, be honest, be transparent, make it about the work and not about the power or the person. And surely sometimes it's not about yourself either.
I think those are great recommendations. And even thinking back to what you said earlier about lateral moves or thinking about other roles and other companies. And it sounds, and forgive me if I'm putting words in your mouth, but, and please feel free to just script or revise here, but that each of us is empowered to really design our own career and to be, I think, to have agency and to take that power and be active, as opposed to sitting back and letting, because even then that's a decision to let folks direct your career, but that we have a lot more power than maybe what we might think that we have in designing what we end up doing.
I would agree. I think if we think about back to some of the women's conferences that we've done with Rise, what are some of those themes? There's themes about finding your purpose, or it's about finding your leadership style. And it is such a journey when you think about where we started and how we get to where we are. Each one of those jobs, each one of those positions really does offer an opportunity to learn. I think it's also a place of finding grace, because as women we have, and men do too. It's not just a female thing, but we have many other dependencies and responsibilities outside of the workplace. And many times those pressures come to work with you. And it becomes hard. It becomes harder as you're going through your career because obviously all of us are highly motivated, really want to do a lot, do the job, do it well, and exceed. It's a lot of pressure we put on ourselves. I think we all talk about mental health and the negative narrative in our heads. That's a very difficult narrative to combat on a daily basis, especially when you work in highly competitive matrixed organizations that we do.
I appreciate that you went there. And I know we've talked often about just carrying those multiple roles. And I know I shared with you personally going through things and not recognizing it maybe at the time, but then now looking in retrospect where I was like, oh, that bubbled up there.
Mhm.
Uh, and I think that it's important to recognize the other aspects of our lives. And I know that some folks would be like, oh, it needs to be distinct or separate. And I personally don't know how it could be. But would love for you to share what you feel comfortable sharing, and then any recommendations that you might have, either as a leader, how other leaders might work with folks like that on their staff. And then also, too, I think I love the word that you used, grace, how we give ourselves. So not only our staff and the people that we work with and our colleagues grace, but then how do we also give ourselves grace? And so would
Mhm.
love for you to share any thoughts or advice that you might have there.
Yeah, absolutely. What's ironic is that I think early in my career, I was one of those people that didn't want to bring those pressures, what was happening outside to my job. And so many people weren't aware of the challenges or what I was going through outside of the building that we worked in. Where I am today is very different. I don't know that most people know all of what I have, but it is a lot more comfortable for me to share in, so thank you. I know we've had lots of conversations. I am one of those sandwich generation people. I have my father who lives with me. He's 85, almost 86, has some pretty serious conditions that have really impacted his mobility and his lifestyle, unfortunately, over the last few years. And I am the fortunate mom of two adult children who are, and if I start crying, you have to forgive me. Are, are lights in my world because they love their grandfather and they support him and they support me through this journey of watching someone you love go through such incredible pain and experiencing it with them. It's a day by day experience because some days he'll be great, and as I've shared with you, some days are just not. And he's a very stoic man raised by culture, but we adore him dearly. And he's probably the center of the world for all three of us. We're very fortunate, but it's really tough to manage that aspect of your life and find the balance with others at different times in your life. And all of that to be said, I've got family, I've got my dad, I've got a really demanding job which I love doing what I do. And I want to have a life. So we talk a lot about work-life balance. And that becomes really hard too, because as a woman of color and as a divorced woman of color, there's a hard balance to find.
I appreciate your courage. Yeah, I applaud you for your courage and for your sharing because there are a lot of people out there that are listening that are in I think, similar challenges and they're resonating with your story. I think that you give hope and it's helpful sometimes to hear what others are going through and how that can then maybe help you navigate your experience or maybe try other ways to navigate that maybe you haven't thought of before. So thank you so much for that.
And I appreciate that. I want to learn because I don't know that I do it great all the time, right? Like it's day to day. Some days are great. And then some days you just want to collapse at the end of the day. I think the factor of giving yourself grace is really important. It's one of those things as you scroll through LinkedIn, we all know that there's some really great LinkedIn posts on leadership and the different criteria of leadership that we all aspire to be and aspire to exemplify. I find that grace is the one that I go back to because I know I need it often. And I look for that. I look to ensure that my team feels that, because I know life is hard and life can be challenging, and and life can be beautiful. But it's a process too.
And even now too, and just thinking you're saying about your staff, and I would love to hear strategies or things that you do with your staff to instill and to promote grace, because that's something, right? It's difficult, especially in our niche industry, to find experts and to retain them. But life, like you said, is complicated and it's difficult, and oftentimes it's very challenging, right? To balance it all, and we want our staff to be balanced too, because that's when they're going to give us their best work and their best effort. Maybe share with us some things or some strategies that you've maybe tried in the past that were successful. Or I'm sure just in your sharing your experience, you exemplify grace. They can see it in you as a leader. But are there other things or other strategies that you've tried with your staff or shared that you think has promoted um,
Yeah.
to them as well?
I would say the most important thing that I think my staff my team knows about me is that I don't have all the answers. And I'm more than willing to say I don't have all the answers. Um, I, I, I'm here to block and tackle on any given day. I have a job. I work on doing my job. And part of that job, or a significant portion of that job to me, is to ensure that I'm blocking and tackling, providing information, sharing, paving the path, so to speak, for them, because they are the doers, the leaders, they're the knowers, they have the details. And I don't always have that time. I don't always have that opportunity. And so for me, a lot of what leadership is about listening and being able to do that. I, I would say I would say that if I think about my career, I've always thought that 51% of my job is to be a good leader and to be a good mentor, and having that, being listening, and being there to for a vent session is really important, because we all have moments during the day when we want to vent or something happens and you just want to get it off your chest. I think that's a really important task that you can do, or a really important activity that you can do for your team. The other thing I would say, though, is on the flip side, is that I also don't do high school drama. I like to say often is that I did high school once myself. My kids went through high school. I'm not doing that again. If we're all acting like adults and we can have a conversation, we can vent, we can have those moments, and we can listen to each other, I think we have a really great team.
I think you hit upon some concepts, some great ones about creating that safe space. And with you sharing, and even it's funny and very apropos, I was having this conversation with my daughter last night as we were driving home from one of our activities. And we were just talking about the importance of humility and being able to admit to someone when you're wrong or when you don't know something. A lot of people think counterintuitively, oh, that's a sign of weakness. And we were talking about like ego and letting go. And I think that just even what you're sharing and sharing with your staff, the humanness of your life and the things that you go through and the challenges and being able to then, but then knowing how to deal with it in a way that's healthy is so important, because you demonstrate right through your leadership and just you as a person that those qualities. And then again, that it's that safe space so that you can grant that grace. So I love that.
I think it's also it's good to remember that there's nothing to be gained by letting perfect get in the way of good.
Yes. Like,
That- And that's in how we behave too. It's in how we treat each other. If we can be good to each other, sometimes you're going to have a bad day and you might sound a little snippy, and that's not what you mean. But it's okay to apologize, and it's okay to have a bad day, because you probably have more good days than you do bad, especially when you're focused on getting the job done and just having grace and humility.
I hope that there are folks out there listening so that they try it, because I know in just thinking, and again, not perfect either, but in times where I've had to admit I made a mistake or that I was wrong, It wasn't an easy thing to do, but once you do it, there's something that's freeing about it, enlightening. And so
Yeah.
I hope that someone listening to the conversation, and even though they might be scared to let go in that way, that really that the feeling I think and the empowerment that comes from being able to do that is just it's like nothing else. Yeah.
And do you find that for me, I think back at some previous jobs is I find that because I am comfortable with admitting that I'm wrong, that it becomes a lot easier of a conversation for your team to also come with those concerns and for you to have a conversation and not feel like it's a like you're not in the penalty box.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
I remember a couple of jobs ago, I used to go to my compliance lead for anything that I felt like would be out of compliance. And I would go down to her office and I would say, I just got to tell you so that it's like off of my chest, so to speak. And you can tell me that it's good or it's bad, but I just need to let you know that I did this or this happened. And she would always say to me, that's not really a compliance issue. And I say, okay, good. Then we're all good. I'm going to go back to my office.
I love that. Oh,
I was like, but I just need you to know. So,
but I definitely think I do. I agree with you. I think it opens up the space. It's difficult. It's difficult to remain in that space as a leader, I think, especially. And not to say that everything relates back to this, but when I think about most leaders, if we think about the disc profile, most of us are in that D area. And we've workshopped that and talked about that at different conferences, women conferences. Um, but it's difficult. It's difficult to get in that space, to remain in that space with staff. But I agree with you. I think it's so important to have those moments, and I agree with you. I think it opens up and really changes the culture, so that people feel that they can behave in that way. And it's not something that happens overnight, right? It does take some time to cultivate, and people have to know that they're safe. And you can't have things or actions that would contradict that because as soon as you do, right, people are going to be, not trust you.
right.
So yeah, so definitely think that's important.
And it's even more, I think it's even harder and more important now that we're mostly remote, right? And so you don't have the face to face time. Just as I think about the conversations that you and I have, we can text on any given day, but it's the face to face time that really offers the opportunity for connection. And we tend to not make the time for that.
But that's the thing, right? We've seen a lot. I know some companies have gone back to being in person, maybe part time, but then there was a lot of uproar with employees, right? That if you do that, I'm not coming back. So, how do there are strategies or things that you would recommend? Like, how do you keep that intimacy, I guess is what I would call it, going in a remote workspace?
Some of it is just asking questions about how the weekend was, how the day is going. I like to interact with my team directly in the sense of there's going to be obviously the activities that we need to address and what's happening, what are the risks, and how are things progressing. But there's also just knowing that they're okay. Asking them, "Are you okay? How's it going?" I like to also ask about their teams. So it's not just that you have a relationship with the person that's reporting to you, but they also have a team that they might be worried about. That they want to be able to ensure that they have the growth and development that they're learning. They're getting what they. So it is a part of the cascading effect. If you ask, then also going to have that they're also going to take care of their teams, subsequently. So I spent a lot of time doing just asking questions.
I love that. I love, prioritizing and in valuing. Yeah, I would agree with you. I think it's so important. And I think just even going back to what you were saying earlier about learning, every opportunity, every person that we interact with, there's a learning opportunity there. And so always finding value in every person that you interact with or come across in your day and demonstrating that is really important. I want to, you've opened up so many things that I think that we could talk forever. I would love to go back and just touch upon, you talked about your struggles with balancing, and I love the strong family unit that you have and taking care of your dad and your adult children and the things that you're working with there, in addition to your job, and I would say a very high powered job as a vice president, the health plan of a very important area. Curious, because we did spend some time talking about this as well. I want to enter in, you're a healthcare leader in healthcare. Maybe talk a little bit about your experience with what you've had with your dad and then knowing what you know in the healthcare arena. Are there any, we don't have to stay in the personal, but I'm just wondering, are there learnings there or things that maybe your personal experiences help shape your professional perspective and maybe how you're putting that to use now in your professional life?
Yes, part of what I do on the day to day is more data driven, and especially when you are at a corporate level job, it's much more removed than being when I was at a plan level, and I felt like I could engage with members directly in some ways. That is, I think, something that is a miss for any one of us in the space that hasn't had a chance to really engage with your membership, your beneficiaries, and understand where they are and meet them where they are. I think about that a lot because with my dad's challenges and just being his primary caregiver, I'm the one that gets to talk to the doctors. And most of the time, if he's in the hospital, I'm the one that is there I'm there first thing in the morning waiting for the attending to show up. So I know what's going on for that. And I will say that having been in the healthcare industry for as long as I have, I always like to joke around. I'm not a clinician, but I can speak clinical. I feel at a loss when I'm in those situations because I can ask the questions. I know when someone walks into the hospital room, um, a staff person should introduce themselves to us. They should say, "This, my name is Vandana and I'm with respiratory therapy," or "My name is Vandana and I'm with the cleaning staff." At, at any given day, that that does not happen. That's disappointing. I think that's where we in healthcare have forgotten why we are in healthcare is, and part of it is just our system is so overwhelming. We have infused the system, the being of healthcare with, and I know the physicians and staff would say this, with paperwork and protocols and what you can do and what you can't. And so there becomes somewhat of a shield between the patient and the provider. But when you're the patient or you're the caregiver of the patient and all is that shield, that's a really tough place to be,
Uh,
especially when on the other side of that shield are a number of people, different people that are giving you different tidbits of information. So everyone has a window of time in which they have to get through their rounds. They have to get through whatever it is their tasks are. That's not an information sorting or information sharing opportunity with the patient or the caregiver. And just to think about it, if you put it all into perspective, what you and I can experience if we were to be in the hospital bed is one thing. When your parents are in that position and they don't have the understanding. Many times our parents and their senior years have hearing issues. They might have different challenges. And so they're not even fully understanding everything that's being shared with them. And that is really frustrating.
Yeah, no, absolutely. One of the things I just think it's fascinating. And if I were to come up with an overall theme of what we've been talking about humanity and putting the humanness back in our relationships and how important that is in the workplace and recognizing the different facets of our lives. And the one place where that's necessary is in healthcare. And yet it's probably the area where it's most lacking. how do we get back to that? Do you have recommendations? Is it that everyone introduce themselves when they come into the room, or are there better ways of disseminating information for the care? Are there things that you can think of that you would recommend that might improve on that experience besides some of the things that we were talking about through demonstration and modeling? Things that we can do to improve the healthcare experience for ourselves, for our ones, and the other stakeholders that are part of it.
I definitely think that there's models, right? We talk a lot about healthcare at home. For seniors, I think healthcare at home, and as difficult as that may be, there's so much money being infused into our systems right now. Healthcare at home, and how can we solve for the aspects of being in the home and staying in the home through different challenges that may or may not always be a clinical challenge you have to address. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to find ways to support our seniors and others who would benefit from that. I think if I go, one of the hardest things about being in the hospital room is the really lousy television because the visuals are really bad. If we think about the technologies that we have today and what could change that narrative of information sharing, of just having a little more comfort in the hospital when you're there, is how about a better screen? How about a screen where the provider can share the information with the patient so they can see and they can read it at their own leisure, and they can read it over and over again because some of them may want to do that. Their families may want to come in and read it because they may have missed the attending. Like what an opportunity that we continue to miss, the opportunities to really leverage simple technologies that we have at our fingertips to make things.
I was going to say that's a great idea. I think you need to patent it, trademark, or whatever it would be. I think that's an excellent idea.
Whoever's list wants to do that, you got to call me.
Absolutely. They heard it here first. We have it documented. I appreciate too that you brought up about home health. There's a lot of new programs and movements coming out. In my consulting work, I've had the opportunity to work with some medical groups that are offering, as part of their network, these hospital at home programs where patients that don't require that higher level of care can be admitted, if you will, to the hospital in their home setting. So more of an observation. And there's rules around that, how many times the physician must round and the mechanisms for that rounding, the level of care that's required. But you're right, it's far more comfortable oftentimes for the patient. I always find the screens are bad, but it's always cold and uncomfortable in those rooms. But you can be in the comforts of your home. What I was hoping too that we might chat about is what you're seeing for the future of healthcare, because I know we're talking about that, but there's been a lot of developments, a lot of changes, and you and I have been heavily involved in Medicare Advantage over the years, maybe Medicaid, but there's a lot of new programs like the hospital at home program, like some others that are coming out. Are you seeing any of these programs as tea leaves for maybe where the industry is going and things that we might expect and things that we might better prepare for?
I think the programs that we're seeing now, either hospital or some of the subspecialty programs that are really focusing on certain populations, is indicative of what we need to do to be better and meet people where they are. So there's programs in behavioral health for teens. There's programs to support patients at home. There's a number of chronic kidney disease subspecialties that are really supporting and identifying the ways to not only care clinically, but also to provide wraparound services for those members. And I think that's really incredibly important. I think one of the areas that I focus on, just the data geek part of me, is the intense need that we have to ensure the data is flowing from one of these entities to the next. It's also available to the member. We, as an organization, an industry, have to come to ground on the data, who's controlling the members of the consent management, how to ensure that it's consented and it's shared appropriately and shared extensively. right? So if there are multiple providers in the care team, we need to ensure that they have the access to the information so that there's not polypharmacy challenges going on. We do a lot of medical record reconciliations, medication reconciliations, but yet it's still amazing how many times patients were 20 different drugs on their medication list, multiples that might be either the same type of drug or contradictory. It's not, we need to do a better job of stopping and pausing and paying attention. And I think the data availability, ensuring that there's consent management controls would make an incredible difference. I personally believe that having the data available and creating the right views and insights from it can really help us to change how we engage with patients and providers, especially from a payer perspective.
I think, again, such important insights. And I have to, a little of the mystique around HEDIS strategy, data analytics. It almost like two different worlds. I would be interested to get your thoughts on how one puts those together. And then, based on what you said around data and the importance of data in patient care, about how you've seen the industry and the use of data evolve, either for good or for bad, in our industry in the years that you've been in it.
I love what's up and coming now, right? So we do a lot more of predictive analytics using machine learning, the infusion of AI into just about every sentence that you speak in our industry has incredible promise. I think the ability to create member profiles and at least use that as a basis for how you might engage and use it, and then taking on more using the data that has more specificity to it, layering that on top of kind of a standard profile set. So not only are you using standard clinical decision making, but you're also ensuring that it's personalized. We can actually start to see the possibility of whole person care. So we've been talking about kind of that whole person or model of care that's more individualized, but it's been population health based because that's how we manage our data in general. Now with AI, we can create models, we can create personas that have some standard level activities that then can be infused with personality to it, essentially.
Wow.
So you can pick and choose as a patient, even. You have the ability to drive some of that. I think that's where we need to go, and that's where we're going as an industry. Again, it's going to be about ensuring that the data is flowing, and so the personas that we're creating are truly impacting and focused on outcomes. And it's a shared outcome of the patient, the provider, and the payer. It can't have a significant imbalance.
Fascinating. You've been in the healthcare industry now, I want to say more than 10 years, 15 years.
Too long.
It feels that way sometimes, right? What would be, fast forward, so thinking ahead 10 years from now, what's something that if you were to launch yourself into the future, to look back to today, that you would say to yourself, that's something that will get sorted out? We're worried about, that's the small stuff, something not to worry about. And then the converse of that, what's something that you would say to yourself, hey, you need to pay attention to this. This deserves more of your attention. So would love for you to do some predictive or some predictions for us.
Couple of things, I think, from a technology standpoint, and what would be things that I hope get sorted out. I hope that we can sort out the barriers that our current EHR technologies have to patient information, to sharing of information or being transparent, and also the complexity of it. Upgrades and implementations are very complex and time staking. And so that unfortunately takes away from our providers from being able to really do the job of taking care of the patient. So I hope that at some point in time that we can move away from mandates of you have to use this API to where we have more of a shared table to be able to discuss what's going to be beneficial and how do we achieve it. I think the other thing, I saw this in a New Year's Eve post several years ago, such and Jane, and it still holds true. When will the fax machine go away? When
Yeah.
are we sending records or sending anything via a fax? Because there's other more secure and really advanced technologies that can improve process outside of just the fax machine. So eh, I don't know when that will happen, but 10 years, that'll be great. I'd love to see that.
I love that you brought that up. I was talking with someone the other day about the fax machine, and we were just saying it's a staple in so many practices still to this. It's very antiquated, and hence the time the stuff that comes across, like it's not being managed, or things are coming across that aren't attended to. And I don't. I love that you brought that up because I would agree with you. Why do you think that it's been so difficult, knowing that there's all this other technology? And I don't know about you, but I can't really think of any other industry where the fax machine is still used. Maybe in education, but I would think that in healthcare and education both, those should be the industries that are on the forefront, right, of technology and those early tech adopters. So why do you think the fax machine has such a grasp and a foothold in the typical American health practice?
What my Where my brain wants to go is immediately we think that it's the best way to manage PHI, which is actually the worst.
Yeah.
You think about it, right? How many times do you walk by a fax machine and see paper still sitting on it?
Yes.
And so whether it's an office or a doctor's office, it is, I wish I could say, I think there's a convenience. I think there's still offices that don't use email to communicate. And really the fear of sharing data using a kind of an unsecure platforms, that to me is still mind boggling. It must be said though, there are still people that mail records. When I think about HEDIS, and we still get paper records in the mail from providers for HEDIS data collection. And I'm not talking about a record or two. I'm talking about records.
Yeah.
So,
I've walked into offices and shelves and they tell me they're still on paper. And yeah.
because
Um,
it's hard to implement an ER and it's expensive.
yes.
And then you got to stay on top of it because then you got the technology that you also have to manage any of the IT issues. And so there's definitely challenges with it, but I think those are opportunities that would definitely create an environment for better outcomes, oddly enough. And I think you asked what can we do? I would say it goes back to grace and humility. We all need to engage with each other and with the collective population that we are here to serve. We are here to serve the people that, whether you're a provider or working in a hospital system or an ACO or a payer, you're here to serve the people that come to your front.
Maybe that's where some things got off track. I think that's a great way to bring us back around to the whole of our conversation. So thank you for that.
In 10 years, what do you want to see change?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've forgotten about the CAP survey.
Let's talk about the cat survey. Tell me your thoughts about the cat survey.
So definitely say the other thing that if we can consider changes to how we operate, somebody has got to come in and change the CAPS, the member experience survey. Member experience is so important, so incredibly important to us on all levels. And we have probably the most archaic way of being able to actually, and if you want to call it measuring it, I would say this is probably the worst way you could do it. The survey is foundationally based on an experience that I may have had at sometime last year. I had sometime last year. When I get the survey, it's definitely months later, not necessarily tied to any specific provider. And I'm asked 40 questions that I have to remember or I have to think about to about one experience. I can barely remember what I did yesterday.
I love that you bring that up. And I'm just thinking too, when we talk about modeling, right? And being aligned or in alignment with how we want to be treated, how healthcare should be whole person and person centered. Thinking about that survey, the 40 questions and the experience of it and the way in which the questions are asked and how you're asked to answer those. And you get it so many weeks or months after. It just seems it's the antithesis of the experience that we want our patients or members to have. And even if they had a great experience, the survey alone is going to stain it for them or taint it in some way because of how they're taking them. Yeah, go ahead.
Right. And don't forget that we don't actually get the results there until months later, even. So the survey is administered for several months. Then it has to be collated and shared with the payers. At which point, like, how is that actionable?
Yeah. Yeah.
What am I acting? Because so much can change in a year. We've seen that happen. So much can change, and hopefully, in some of those environments, things are changing for the better. So there's if the information is not real time, it's not action, it's not support what we're actually looking to accomplish. We've got to find a better way, and it's just an incredible process. And I will say I think the industry as a whole is reflecting the decline in the survey response rate. And so you're making assumptions and you're making kind of changes to your activities based on a much smaller response pool, right? Something's got to give on the one.
Again, I think that there are so many threads that we can pull on in our conversation. And earlier we were talking about, would agree with you that so we talked about earlier about, and I'm searching for the words, but we talked about inaction. So even in our careers, when we fail to act, there's a decision being made there. We failed to act. And I feel like in healthcare, it's the same thing. We could throw our hands up in the air and say, oh, what's to be done? But I think that you're bringing up or making some really good observations. And how would you encourage advocacy by those that are listening, right? Because again, how can we take action and be advocates we're on the boots on the ground. We're seeing what's happening. We have ideas about how we can improve things. We're not helpless. And so, what recommendations would you have for advocacy for those out there working in this space?
I believe in simplicity, and I believe in understanding what the problem is and finding a simple solution. And I would say, I don't know many other industries, but I would say in healthcare, we're really good at complexifying the simple.
Even that word. Love it.
If you can think about ways in which, when we think about advocating for our patients, obviously we want to advocate for those that are most vulnerable. We want to advocate for those that are that through data that we can help to support, and it's not always the data, but we can help to support finding ways to at least enable solutions. I think part of that is also not trying to fix or assume the answer. I think, especially from a payer perspective, a lot of times we act and we create solutions because we think we know what the answer is, and that's not always the case. You know, I would say for any one of us, when you have different conditions, you don't always want the most invasive. You don't always want to take the medicine. You may want to explore something that is an understanding versus a clinical pathway. And so those are important things that I think we need to think about. I believe that as much as I see in terms of what's starting to pop up, the different areas of focus is ensuring that we are finding ways to meet our members, our patients where they are. They deserve that.
100%. I love how we were able to talk about various areas of our lives, either as women leaders, your experience as a daughter taking care of your father, your experience in leadership and in healthcare over the years, as well as just navigating some of the challenges around data and HEDIS and some of the things that we come across. And there were some common themes, even though they were very different topics, and this idea of humility. And I think focusing on, as you said, starting where someone is. You mentioned that with staff, learning about their day and honoring them people and the experiences they have. And we should be doing that with our patients. This idea of humility and being able to admit you don't always have the answer, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes we get it wrong. This idea of making things simple, getting back to an easier time where we can improve communications, even from our conversation about TV screens and hospital instead of fax machines. I really think I've really enjoyed our conversation, and it's almost this beautiful art in how these themes kept resurfacing throughout. And I definitely think that there's something to be considered there as the audience is listening and thinking and reflecting about their own experience and their programs as well. I really appreciate your time today, and I know I could keep talking to you all night. Anything else that you wanted to talk about today, or we're hoping that we could get to that we haven't talked about yet?
No, I think I really appreciate you inviting me to be on your podcast. You know how much I admire you and all that you do for us as the women in your sphere or the others in your sphere of influence, as well as just for the industry. So thank you.
The pleasure was all mine. So I always enjoy getting to chat with you. Thank you so much.